Uttaram yat samudrasya himadrishchev dakshinam varshtad bharatam nam bharati yatra santati. This means to the north of the sea and south of Himalayas lays a piece of land which is called Bharat, and its children are called Bharati. This is not just defining what the Indian boundaries are. This is not delineating the boundaries of India, but this is describing the land which is called India. India, for its cultural, ethical, physical, geographical value, has stood for thousands and thousands of years. And by context, 5,000 plus years of old civilization is what India represents. And when we look at this historical concept, we also understand that it is not just the history which makes India, but it is the spiritual existence, it's the cultural existence which makes India what India is. It has been a melting pot of cultures, philosophy, spirituality, a collective way of living by the people who are called Bharatis or Bhartiyas. And this collective way of living has been described as culture, which is Sanskriti. And the culture itself is called Sanskriti. And Sanskrit is what the language of this country or this subcontinent has been. This goes to define what India represents in terms of human values, because through the centuries, the culture itself in India has been defined as Sanskrit Dharma, Manav Dharma. Sanskriti is around Manav Dharma, which means the culture itself is around the human civilization, human values, and human coexistence, collective existence. The collective existence which showcases the ways of living, which showcases the ways of organizing society, which is influencing the value system, which is influencing the social attitudes. And these social attitudes finally go to depict how people in the country are going to be representing themselves. I must say that in spite of so many challenges, right from climate change, climatic issues, weather issues, degradation of so many artifacts has taken place. But in addition to this, it has also been a subject matter of invasion, plunders, in imperialistic powers, smuggling. All kinds of wrongs have happened to the continuous civilization which India has been. So I always say that it is not about what India is, it is a statement about continued civilization and existence in spite of challenges. And while we appreciate our challenges, while we appreciate our resilience, but what is worrying is that invincible forces have continued the civilization, but invaluable heritage of this country has been looted in an unabated manner for 1,000 plus years. And these invasions, or people who caused invasions, plunderers, imperialistic powers, and mercenaries, have continued to plunder the treasure of India. In this light, I must say that the continent of India or the subcontinent of India has faced innumerous challenges, and in spite of these challenges, several tools have been used to restore, recreate, and repatriate these stolen goods from India. I must also add that India, in its sense, derives its value from continuous civilization. It has been an object of desire, but object of desire is also usually an object of jealousy. It's also an object of plunder. It's also been an object of stealing, theft. And these things which have gone out of India for 1,000 plus years need to be repatriated. Symbols of national pride lay in museums, in private collections, with people where we do not know much about. UNESCO's estimate is that about 50,000 of such objects lie in various collections across the world, in museums, in private collections. The truth is that this number must actually be much higher, for the simple reason that all collections are not displayed and all objects have not been occupied in a legitimate manner. There is no way of finding out where those collectible items are lying. All I need to say is that while these are collectible objects for some, for others, this is representative of the blood and sweat of their ancestors. The value attached to these objects is very different from two perspectives. Soubcue of being India being Sone ki Chidiya, a golden bird or a golden sparrow, is actually depicting India's treasure trove. It's actually identifying that there was so much of riches in and around India, present day India, that this was called and described as Sone ki Chidiya, a golden bird. And thus, being prey to the praying agencies is but natural. The artifacts of yesteryears may fill the drawing rooms or the cellars or the shelves of people who possess it. But these very artifacts are not artifacts for the people who made it possible to exist in the first place or who created them. The rights and the perspectives of the possessor and the plunderer is very different from the rights and sentiments attached to these very artifacts by the people who created it. For example, stones like Kohinoor, pink diamond, green emerald, Kaladi shivling may be of material value to the people who possess it, who auction it, and who buy and sell it. But those who created it, the value goes far beyond their material value. These were the third eye of Lord, of God. They represent the spiritual and philosophical values attached to them, and that's why they were, in the first place, given to the temples. The fact is that the attitudes and implications vary from people to people. Those who are in possession today, as compared to the ones who created it in the first place. I must cite a case law of Her Majesty versus Lord Shiva. This is a British case, or this is a case which took place in Britain. And R. Nagaswamy was one person who was assigned the task of bringing back a Chola bronze of Lord Shiva. So the Chola bronze, and it was argued before the court, and it was agreed upon by the court that the deity is represented as a juristic person, and that juristic person exists beyond the material existence. Even if in damaged condition or otherwise, once a deity, always a deity, and thus deity has a right to go back to its home. And because of this particular case, the statue of Lord Shiva came back to India. I must remind people that many of our artifacts, which lie in museums, in drawing rooms, in cellars, so on and so forth, are misclassified as objects of Asian origin and Asian artifacts under a very generic description. This description is probably on purpose so that the theft doesn't get detected. The original creators and possessors do not get to identify it. And the theft of cultural heritage is not merely an issue of lost identity, but it is also an issue of national identity, and it gets to undermine self-respect of people and collective existence of people, and their connection to history is what gets to be hurt by these actions. I must also remember and tell everyone that many a times these objects of reverence are mutilated, or their existence itself is altered, because people who are smuggling them out of the country, they wish to prevent the rightful claims from their country of origin or people who actually created it. These are aspects which need to be taken care of when we deal with issue as complicated as repatriation of artifacts. I must also remember that while some artifacts may have been stolen from temples and others may be categorized as objects of personal use, And third category could be the anthropological remains. For some, things could be just of anthropological interest, but for the others, it could be the mortal remains of their dead ancestors. And the example in point is the example of Nagas. The objects which could be called as personal use, for example, the beads, the ornaments, the weapons, but these were the things which belonged to their ancestors, and the technology of those times is what was used. More importantly, when I think of the traditions which continued in the Naga history, that they used to carry the mortal remains of their ancestors with them while shifting villages or outside the village. It was kept. The same was taken away as anthropological remains need to be restored back to the families and uh, the community to which they belong. Um, this being the history, I must also tell part of modern history is the independence of our nation as India. Uh, Post independence, we did bring some legislative changes and brought in some legislative measures to combat the illegal export and smuggling which was going on in this country for so many years. Antiquities Export Control Act of 1947 was a step in this direction. Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites Remains Act of 1958, then Antiquities and Art Treasure Act of 1972, then from state enactment to marking these cases of stolen artifacts as to be reported to CBI, involvement of Interpol and MEA were some of the issues which we tried to introduce. But I must also say that while these changes have been introduced, but they lack the robust mechanism, and proving theft was always a challenge, and unchecked, unabated theft kept going on. The To establish the patrimonial rights, provenance, and establishing all this became a challenge because we were a country which was invaded and enslaved over thousands of years, and even post independence, the gaps in legislation remains. Artifacts, while are celebrated by some, the same have deep-rooted connection to the Indian populace in terms of its heritage and culture. The return of these artifacts post independence has been abysmal. It is not only disappointing but astonishing that from the period of independence, say from 1947 to 2014, only 13 artifacts have been brought back to this country. And in this context, it becomes relevant that Prime Minister had taken upon himself as a rescuer of the stolen artifacts and the cultural heritage of this country. In this light, the US India Cultural Property Agreement, which has taken place on 26 July 2024, it can be seen as a culmination of years of work which has taken place during Modi 2 and homecoming or Ghar Vapsi of 297 objects this time. Concludes the or marks the conclusion of this ceremony. The 10th, 12th century Apsara, 3rd, 4th century terracotta vase from northeastern India, 1st century BC statue from southern India are some of the highlights of this arrangement. During his earlier visit to the United States, 157 such artifacts were handed over to him during his visit in 2021, and which included 12th century Natraj statue and also a Harappan seal. 105 objects of reverence were handed over to him in 2023. So, soon to be repatriated, these artifacts would mark a significant victory for the cultural heritage advocacy groups and will further increase the number of repatriated antiquities to 640, which itself is a number which we all vie for. But we all know the numbers far exceed and the gaps still need to be filled. During India's G20 presidency, certain policy level interventions have been made, and one such intervention is that cultural property protection and repatriation of antiquities should be made a priority amongst participating nations. There was a discussion which was called Kashi Culture Pathway. In this particular discussion, it was brought out that international support for combating illicit trafficking and of stolen goods and antiquities need to be taken care of, and whatever are the possibilities of cooperation and legislative changes, that should be made very much part of the G20 grouping. New Delhi Declaration of the Leaders further strengthened this proposal. So, New Delhi Declaration of 2023 reaffirmed the global commitment to strengthen efforts from national to regional to international levels, and participation of all is required for the repatriation and return of artifacts. So, from repatriation to restitution is what was proposed, and to enable it, make an enabling atmosphere across the globe. All this erupted and came forward from Rome Declaration of the G20 nations. During Rome Declaration, it was decided that these particular suggestions and declarations will be adopted and recognized, and threat to cultural resources, including looting and illicit trafficking, will be taken to task and will be corrected by the participating nation. I must say that PM has been vocally very pushy about this particular agenda, and he has pushed this agenda for a strong policy intervention for repatriation of stolen artifacts and goods from the countries of origin. The world has to deliberate upon the impediments in the way which are creating difficulties for repatriation of treasures that are important not just from the economic point of view, but from the heritage and cultural perspective of the countries of their origin. Thus, the world needs to recognize these so as to make the repatriation a possibility. Cultural heritage is a vital component not only from the perspective of national identity, but from the very existence of the nation state and the cultural identity of the people, which goes beyond but also recognizes the national identity. Scars of looting and plunder are something which no nation can forget, but ongoing efforts of repatriation and cooperation amongst the nation also signify a brighter future and hope for the future. Reclaiming its national treasure and national heritage is not only an act which binds the nation's state legally, but it is also an act which is erupting from the duties towards our own nation. I must say, when India reclaims its heritage and reclaims its past, it also builds on its confidence. And India's experience in the processes, in the procedures, in the legality will stand as a guiding light for other countries as well, especially the countries of the South. I wish the best and express hope in repatriation of antiquities to where it belongs. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.